Ava Becker slammed the cruiser door with a sharp click, boots crunching over gravel as she stepped toward the motionless man. "This has to be a joke," she muttered, narrowing her eyes. There, astride a matte black Triumph Bonneville, sat an elderly man, weathered but poised, rigid like a statue carved from quiet defiance. The bike, a machine that looked as though it had roared through history and come to rest on this sleepy roadside, gleamed faintly under the afternoon sun. "Sir, I need you to dismount," slowly, she ordered, one hand hovering near her holster. Her voice held authority, but it trembled at the edges. Rick Stone didn't flinch. 82 years had hardened the lines of his face into something between serenity and command. He didn't look at her. His gaze remained fixed on the road ahead, the horizon reflecting in his deep-set eyes, eyes that had seen more than most people could fathom. "You okay, old-timer?" she added with a smirk, masking the discomfort that crept up her spine. Her fingers twitched. Was it the silence? His stillness? Something about this man unsettled her. He looked too calm. Too composed. Not a hint of confusion, not a whiff of fear. Ava's radio crackled, but she didn't listen. She was too focused on the eerie confidence the man radiated. Then, from the distance, a low rumble. Not thunder. Engines. Dozens. She turned her head, squinting toward the ridge. Dust billowed over the crest as a convoy of military trucks emerged, tactical, matte, unannounced. Soldiers in formation. 50 of them, at least, in desert fatigues and mirrored shades, armed but at ease. They stopped behind the cruiser. Stone remained seated. And that's when she realized, he wasn't alone. Long before the polished black Triumph hummed beneath him, Rick Stone was a force of nature. Born in 1943 in rural Idaho, he grew up amidst mountain silence and his father's hard-set discipline. He was splitting firewood before sunrise at 10, navigating forest trails by instinct at 12, and out shooting the local sheriff with a hunting rifle by 16. His body toughened in the cold, his mind sharpened by solitude. At 18, he left for the army. By 21, he was already turning heads at Fort Bragg. The Special Forces recognized something in Stone that went beyond endurance. He didn't just survive training, he dismantled it and remade it his own. He was a tactician of uncommon clarity, blending raw instinct with disciplined strategy. He moved through jungles in Vietnam like a shadow, slipping between bamboo thickets with barely a rustle. His ability to remain unseen earned him the call sign, Spectre. In Cambodia, 1972, he led an unauthorized extraction of 3 POWs under enemy radar. Court-martialed, then quietly promoted. He received his first Silver Star after the 1980 Iranian embassy crisis. No citation detailed his actual role, only vague references to logistical advisement. Those who knew said he pulled out a captured operative seconds before the building went up in flames. For Stone, there were no books written. His stories lived only in scars, and in the changed lives of those he'd saved. After retiring from the military in 2005, Stone bought a piece of land in northern Utah, acres of open prairie and a view of the Wasatch Range. He built the cabin himself, timber by timber, nails driven in with the same rhythm he used to field strip rifles. But idleness never suited him. He turned to woodworking, first crafting simple benches and tables, then specialized furniture for disabled veterans. Adjustable counters, wide-door chairs, prosthetic-compatible designs, all precise, all made with reverence. Word spread. Orders came not just from Utah, but from all across the western states. He never charged the vets. He ran on donations and government grants when they came. If they didn't, he made do with less. Every piece he sent out bore a tiny, almost hidden brand on the bottom, a stylized hawk carrying a branch. It became a symbol in local circles, hope carved into oak. Rick never married. He claimed the military was his one true commitment. But those who visited his farm saw signs of deep care. Photos of soldiers he trained, letters from kids now grown with kids of their own. One wall of the workshop was covered in framed patches and insignias, units he'd led, advised, or saved. He could still bench press more than most men in their prime. Every morning at 5 o'clock, he jogged the perimeter of his land, rain or shine, the rhythm of his boots still crisp. He never stopped training. He built an obstacle course behind the barn, used by young recruits from the nearby base who'd heard of the old ghost. They brought him coffee, sometimes bourbon, and left with sore muscles and quiet awe. Some thought he was just a relic. Others, those who watched him move, speak, and quietly correct their technique, knew better. And yet, age crept in. His joints ached longer after each workout. A fall and winter took months to fully heal. Still, he pushed on. When his old Ford tractor finally gave out, its engine wheezing one last time beside the barn, he visited a small bike shop 3 towns over and bought a Triumph Bonneville T120. Matte black, retro styling, low to the ground. Solid. Elegant. No frills. She's reliable, the mechanic had said, brushing dust off the tank. Stone had nodded once. So am I. He named her Judith, not after a lover, but after an old recon phrase, just understand, danger isn't the end. That day, the Bonneville replaced the truck. For errands, hardware runs, vet visits, it was Judith and him, riding smooth along country roads. Always geared up, helmet strapped, back straight. And so it was that on a quiet Tuesday morning, Stone set out to refill a propane tank and pick up some sandpaper. A trip he'd done dozens of times. The tank was strapped on tight. He wore a faded green field jacket, one that hadn't seen regulation in 20 years but fit like a second skin. He didn't expect an encounter. But he always expected something. Officer Ava Becker had just been transferred from a precinct in Ogden. Young, proud, and trying to make her mark in a town that hadn't seen a felony in months. She was eager to prove herself, keen-eyed for violations. When she saw an older man on a vintage bike parked at the roadside pump, no plate visible, tank loaded oddly, her instincts kicked in. Suspicion rose. She called it in. No red flags. But still, he looked too calm, too prepared. She decided to question him directly. She parked behind him, lights flashing once. He didn't react. As she approached, a wind stirred dust into the air. His posture, upright, unmoving, reminded her of something out of a war photo. A man posed for battle, not surrender. And though she didn't know it yet, the man on the bike was still very much a soldier. The air had that dry, electric stillness common in small towns before something shifts, something unseen but undeniable. Officer Ava Becker stood rigid beside the gas pump, right hand near her service belt as the elderly man remained stoic on his Triumph. He had finally dismounted, one boot on the ground, both hands clearly visible. Still, her caution held firm. License and registration, she said, tone firm but professional. Stone reached into his jacket slowly, methodically, and produced the documents without a word. She examined them, frowning. Everything was in order. Utah license, valid registration for the motorcycle, insurance details, all up to date. Yet something gnawed at her. A quiet rebellion in the way he moved, unhurried, perfectly controlled, like a man who had already measured the threat and decided she wasn't one. You live around here? Stone nodded once. That's right. You mind if I take a look around the bike? I do, he replied calmly. There's no probable cause. That answer, truthful, unflinching, poked at her pride. She'd asked nicely, expected compliance. His refusal made her feel tested, undermined. She tilted her chin, reasserted her stance. Sir, this is a routine inspection. Then inspect it from where you stand. A small crowd had gathered near the pumps and across the street at Manny's diner. This was a town where a traffic stop could draw more attention than the evening news. Heads peeked over newspapers, coffee mugs paused mid-sip. Someone murmured, "Isn't that the old man who lives past the ridge?" Another replied, "Yeah, but what's he doing on that thing?" A third voice, "Is he resisting?" "Backup requested," Becker said into her radio, too quietly to sound urgent, but loud enough to demonstrate control. Stone crossed his arms, boots planted wide. The Triumph's matte finish absorbed the sun, just as he absorbed the weight of every watching eye. A second officer arrived. Jenkins. Younger than Becker but with 3 years more experience in the field. He gave her a look, half confusion, half concern, and walked over. "Problem?" he asked. Becker hesitated. "The gentleman refuses a vehicle inspection." Jenkins blinked. "For what reason are we inspecting?" "Suspicious behavior." Uncooperative tone. Stone spoke then, calmly. "I've provided legal documentation. I have no record. There's no legal basis to detain me." Jenkins studied Stone for a long second, then said quietly, "He's right." But Becker wasn't ready to back down. Frustrated by the onlookers and embarrassed by Stone's composure, she stepped forward and gestured to the Triumph. "Lift the saddlebag." Stone's expression didn't change. "Not without a warrant." She took another step. Her hand brushed the top of her holstered pistol, not to draw, but the gesture alone made the small crowd inhale audibly. That's when the phones came out. Video cameras flicked on. The 21st century's unblinking jury had arrived. "Ma'am," Jenkins said with more force now, "let's de-escalate." "I've got this," she snapped. Behind the glass window of the gas station, Marco Reyes stood still as stone, jaw tight, watching through mirrored sunglasses. His hand tightened around a pack of napkins he was restocking. It crushed flat. His wife, Elena, noticed the change in him, but said nothing. "Do you even know who that is?" Marco muttered under his breath. Then he turned and walked swiftly to the back office. Outside, the questions began to rise from the crowd. Why's she hassling him? Doesn't she know who that is? That's Rick Stone, right? The vet? No kidding. He helped build my uncle's wheelchair ramp. Becker was sweating now, not from heat, but from something colder, doubt. Yet she couldn't stop. She had pushed too far to pull back without losing face. "Sir, I'm giving you a lawful order," she said, voice tightening. Stone's voice remained steady. "And I respectfully decline. You'll need a supervisor or a warrant. I know my rights." Jenkins stepped between them. "Ava. Enough." But it was too late. The tone had shifted. Respect had turned to tension, tension to public scrutiny. A child nearby asked her mother, "Why is that lady yelling at Grandpa?" From the back office of the gas station, Marco Reyes dialed a secure number from an old contact sheet he hadn't touched in over a decade. The number rang 3 times. "Major Hawthorne," a voice answered. "Marco Reyes." Code word Blue Echo. "We've got a problem." There was silence on the line. "Location?" He gave the town, the station address, and the name of the man involved. "Stone?" Hawthorne asked, voice darkening. "Yes. ETA 20 minutes. Stay visible, stay calm." He hung up. Outside, Becker had begun circling the bike, tapping it with a flashlight, posturing without progress. Stone remained unmoving. His silence, his poise, it wasn't arrogance. It was discipline. Experience. Presence. The kind of presence that comes from war zones, not gas stations. As more townspeople gathered, some began murmuring his name with growing recognition. Becker's authority frayed by the second. She sensed it, tried to mask it. But the shift had begun. No sirens. No raised voices. Just a stillness, like the air before a thunderclap. And then, in the far distance again, the unmistakable hum of diesel engines, synchronized, deep, and approaching fast. This time, it wasn't backup. Marco Reyes stood just outside the station's office door, arms crossed over a faded Marine Corps hoodie, his gaze locked on the scene outside. The breeze carried the scent of gasoline and sun-warmed asphalt. Across the lot, Rick Stone hadn't moved an inch. Neither had the tension. It stretched tight as piano wire between him and Officer Becker, who now paced back and forth like a tethered dog unsure whether to bark or back down. Marco's mind churned, but his hands remained still. Years ago, that was one of the things Rick Stone had taught him: in chaos, be still. Let others move first. Marco had met Stone in 2004, a few weeks after losing his left calf to an IED in Kandahar. He'd been shipped back, stitched up, pumped full of painkillers, and dropped into a veteran support group he didn't want to attend. That was where Stone walked in, not with a cane, not with pity, but with a clipboard and a blueprint for a custom workbench Marco could use without standing. "You're still a builder," he had said. "You just need different tools." From that moment on, Marco had followed him like a compass needle to north. He learned to carve again, to balance without bitterness, to move through a world that wanted to look away. Stone had shown him how to command space without shouting, how to speak without words. And now, Stone was in the crosshairs of a young cop who didn't even know the legend she was poking with a stick. Elena appeared beside him, her voice low. "You made the call?" He nodded. "To Anna." Elena's eyebrows lifted, impressed. "Didn't think you'd dust off that number." "I didn't want to," he said. "But this isn't just about Rick. It's about how we treat what we don't understand." Inside, the old wall clock ticked. Outside, phones recorded. And far down the road, the low hum of coordinated engines began to distinguish itself from background traffic. The sound of arrival. Not the wild, erratic howl of emergency response, but the disciplined growl of trained wheels. A blacked-out Humvee appeared first over the ridge, followed by 2 tactical troop transports and a smaller convoy vehicle with the U.S. flag discreetly painted above its license plate. Uniformed soldiers, clean, precise, boots perfectly laced, stood in back, rifles strapped but not drawn. No sirens. No lights. Just presence. Officer Becker's hand dropped from her hip as her eyes widened. She took one step back as the convoy pulled into the station's gravel lot and began forming a perimeter, not aggressively, but with practiced control. Stone hadn't moved. Marco saw a flicker of something cross Becker's face, confusion, then calculation, then something harder to name. The first to exit the command vehicle was Major Anna "Hawk" Hawthorne. She stood 6 feet tall even without her boots, lean from years of combat drills and uncompromising routine. Her dark hair was braided tightly, no nonsense. The kind of woman who could snap a spine with a sentence and still speak in calm tones. She surveyed the scene with surgical precision before walking, slow, deliberate steps, straight toward Rick Stone. And then, in front of half the town and 2 stunned officers, she saluted. "Major Stone," she said, her voice carrying clear. "Ausbilder. Mentor. Freund." Stone inclined his head slightly. "Major Hawthorne." Becker stared in disbelief. "Ausbilder?" Hawthorne turned toward her. "Yes, ma'am. This man trained the unit that pulled my brother out of a collapsed compound in Baglin. He led 6 Black Ops missions in terrain no map dares chart. He's the reason I survived selection. And today, he's the reason you haven't made the biggest mistake of your career." The weight of her words fell like lead on Becker's shoulders. Jenkins took a step back, as if instinctively realizing this scene was no longer his to participate in. The soldiers stood in respectful silence, a living wall of acknowledgement. They weren't here to intimidate, but their presence sent a message more potent than any raised voice: we don't forget our own. Becker's voice, brittle now, escaped before she could stop it. I didn't know. Of course not, Hawthorne replied, tone neutral. Because you didn't ask. You assumed. You profiled him because of his age, his vehicle, his silence. And now you've drawn a crowd. One that understands something you don't. Becker swallowed hard. He refused inspection. Stone finally turned, his voice dry but not unkind. I exercised my rights. Hawthorne softened just slightly. You didn't break the law. You enforced your dignity. Marco stepped forward now, joining the loose circle. Stone has built more for this country than most of us ever will, during war and after it. He trained men who became legends. He carried others home on his back. He taught us what strength looks like when nobody's watching. The crowd, silent until now, began to shift, nods, murmurs, affirmations. A few veterans among them stepped forward to form an impromptu line behind Stone. Not in formation. Not in protest. Just, present. Becker stared at them, then at the convoy, then back at Stone. For a moment, it looked like she might cry, not from shame, but from the sheer weight of it all. From the realization that she tried to assert power over someone who was power, wrapped not in uniform but in patience. Major Hawthorne nodded to Jenkins. This situation is resolved. Jenkins gave a small, grateful nod. Becker looked at Stone again, then at the Triumph, then at her own reflection in the station window. What she saw wasn't authority. It was inexperience. Ego. And now, maybe, possibility. Stone swung one leg back over the bike. The crowd stepped aside for him, not out of fear, but respect. Before he kicked the ignition, he looked at Becker and said simply, "Pride without wisdom breaks more than it builds." And then the Bonneville rumbled to life. The sun hung lower now, casting long shadows across the asphalt and bathing the gas station in amber. As Rick Stone's Bonneville idled quietly, the soldiers still stood in formation, not rigid like statues, but poised like sentinels of something sacred. The moment hadn't passed, it had deepened. Becker's hand slowly dropped to her side, her posture softening for the first time. Her eyes, though, remained locked on Stone, as if trying to solve a riddle she didn't know she'd been living beside. Major Hawthorne walked slowly to her, boots crunching with each deliberate step. She stopped at arm's length. "What's your name, officer?" "Becker." "Ava Becker." Hawthorne gave a single, slow nod. "How long have you worn that badge?" 13 months. Another nod. No condescension. Just gravity. "Then it's time you learned where it comes from." Before Becker could speak, Hawthorne turned toward the soldiers and raised 2 fingers. One of the younger corporals jogged over and handed her a slim, sand-colored binder, military grade, thick with declassified pages. Hawthorne offered it to Becker. "Read that. It's just a summary. Not everything, we never put everything in writing, but enough to understand." Becker took it with both hands, as if holding something radioactive. Marco stepped forward. "You might want to sit down for that." The binder bore a simple black stencil, SRD Stone, Selected Operations, Eyes Cleared. Inside were after-action reports, commendation summaries, and selected personnel records. As Becker flipped through it, silence swallowed the lot again. She stopped at a photo. A grainy black and white image of a much younger Rick Stone, gear-laden, flanked by a squad of grim-faced men in what looked like mountainous terrain. Each wore a patch she didn't recognize. A red hawk over twin blades. "That's Helmand," Hawthorne said quietly. 2008, Operation Broken Lance. Classified until 2 years ago. I've never heard of it, Becker murmured. Because that was the point, Marco said, now standing beside her. That mission saved a NATO command outpost. 16 hostages, 12 of them civilian contractors. Rick led the infiltration, alone, for 46 hours, over mine-laced ridges, through fog and incoming fire. He set the charges to breach, marked every soldier's location on his arm in Sharpie, and carried out 3 wounded men under active fire. No air support. No extraction plan. Becker blinked, turning the page. Another commendation. Silver Star. Then another. He has 2, she asked, incredulous. 3, Hawthorne corrected her. But the third was denied because the mission technically never happened. A soldier stepped forward then, tall, dark-skinned, with a gentle but commanding air. He removed his sunglasses and addressed Becker directly. My name is Sergeant First Class Jamal Hines. Rick trained me in 2012. I was a hotshot, too, until he broke me down and built me into something solid. I owe my life to him. And not just mine. My kids, too. He helped my wife when our VA claim stalled. Hand-built a ramp into our house. Drove it there himself. 8 hours round trip. More soldiers stepped forward, one by one, each offering a fragment of the man Becker had tried to contain with a badge. Captain Alvarez, said a woman with close-cropped hair. He taught me how to lead under fire, by not flinching when bullets start flying. Lieutenant Darnell, offered another. I walked off a cliff in my own head after Kandahar. Stone caught me before I hit the bottom. Even Jenkins finally stepped up. I remember hearing about him back in training. Didn't think he was real. Becker looked up from the binder, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. She turned slowly to Stone, still on the Bonneville, hands resting lightly on the grips. I didn't know, she said. Stone looked at her, not coldly, not even sternly, but with the calm distance of a man who had long since made peace with being misunderstood. You didn't ask. His voice was soft, but it struck deep. Then, gently, he throttled down the bike and stood beside it. A uniform doesn't grant authority. It reflects responsibility. That badge on your chest is earned every day, not wielded. Becker swallowed, throat dry. I wasn't trying to, she began, then stopped herself. She exhaled, steadying. You're right. The wind picked up, rustling the tall grasses along the edge of the road. Hawthorne placed a hand on Becker's shoulder, not to reprimand, but to anchor. There's a training we're putting together, she said. Joint initiative between our base and local departments. We call it Respect durch Verständnis, respect through understanding. It's about learning where we come from, what we've carried. Rick's story will be the cornerstone. Becker looked at the crowd, then at the uniformed wall still standing quietly. Then to Stone, whose presence had somehow grown without movement. I want in, she said. Stone gave the faintest of nods. Good. From behind them, Marco added, you're not the first to misread him. But you might be the last. Later that evening, the convoy dispersed quietly, no sirens, no farewells. Just a silent return to shadows. The townspeople drifted off, the story already weaving itself into local legend. And Rick Stone? He rode off the same way he'd come, calm, focused, unhurried. But something had shifted. The air around him no longer buzzed with suspicion. It hummed with reverence. Becker stood alone by her cruiser for a long while after. She stared at the horizon, trying to imagine it through his eyes, through the gaze of a man who'd seen nations fall and rise, who'd held death close enough to know life's true weight. And for the first time in her young career, she didn't feel in control. She felt responsible. 3 days after the confrontation, Rick Stone's name had traveled faster than rumor. There were no headlines, no official statements, just murmurs. In barbershops and grocery aisles, over coffee and cornbread, the story moved like weather, a quiet reckoning, one told with respect. People said Officer Becker had drawn her weapon on a ghost. Others said Stone hadn't moved because legends never had to. But Stone hadn't stayed idle. With help from Major Hawthorne and Fort Creek Base, he designed a new program. Respect Through Understanding, they called it. A joint workshop for law enforcement and military personnel. Location? Stone's farm. It was his idea. People learn best standing on real ground, he'd told Hawthorne. Let them come where service lives. The first session landed on a cool, clear Saturday. 12 officers arrived. No uniforms, no rank. Just jeans, notebooks, and quiet curiosity. Officer Becker was among them. Nervous but determined, she parked her cruiser outside the gate and walked toward the barn where folding chairs circled an open space. She didn't wear her badge. That was deliberate. Stone greeted each participant with a nod. No handshakes, no ceremony. When he reached Becker, he paused just long enough for her to feel the weight of it. Then he said, "This way," and gestured toward a trail that led behind the barn. They walked in silence for a while. The land rolled out in golden tufts of grass. Wind stirred the trees. He led her to a bench beneath a cottonwood. On the table beside it lay a photo album. He opened it. Black and white images. Soldiers in dusty uniforms. Helicopters in desert skies. Faces weary but proud. One photo stopped Becker cold. Stone crouched beside a wounded man, tying off a tourniquet with calm precision. "Taylor," he said. "Good soldier. Bad luck. Did he make it?" Stone shook his head. IED in Helmand. 2009. They turned more pages. Some faces bore X marks. Others had notes: fearless, too young, died right. Becker's throat tightened. "You remember all of them?" "I remember who they were before they bled." She sat back. The wind shifted. "You could have said all this that day." "I shouldn't have needed to," he said. He closed the book and stood. "Come on." He led her to a lean-to. Under a canvas tarp was a wooden chair, broad, sturdy, beautiful. A maple badge was carved into its seat. 3 words were etched on the backrest. Stand. Listen. Serve. "I started it months ago," Stone said. "Didn't know who it was for. Now I do." Becker touched the smooth wood, speechless. "You made a mistake," he added, "but you owned it. That's rarer than you think." They walked back toward the main clearing where the other officers had begun their first exercise with Hawthorne. Stone didn't join them. Instead, he walked Becker into his workshop. Rows of half-finished benches, mobility aids, hand-carved utensils. Function woven with care. "You built all this yourself?" Stone nodded. "After I stopped pulling people from fire, I started helping them stand again." "And this is your retirement?" He smiled. "This is still service. Just quieter." They returned to the porch near sunset. 2 chairs. A pot of coffee. Horses grazing in the distance. Crickets starting their nightly chorus. Becker took her seat without waiting to be asked. Stone poured coffee into 2 mugs. They sat in silence. "I wish I'd seen this side of things sooner," she said. "You weren't ready." She looked down. "Do you think it'll ever be enough? What we do?" Stone sipped his coffee, eyes on the horizon. "Doesn't matter. We keep showing up." The light faded. The quiet remained. "Earn it."